when I say the word game, you know what you're thinking. You're thinking Steam, you're thinking consoles, you're thinking mobile phones, like the typical game, really. But we make audio games. So we make games primarily for smart speakers. And that is an oddity, to say the least. During my internship at Wanderword, we had this little Friday where we didn't have anything to do. So the 3 interns, we kind of put together a little prototype, because so far into the internship, we had been making sort of interactive audiobooks where you listen to an audiobook, and every minute or so it kind of pauses, and the audiobook asks you a question, like, do you want to go left or do you want to go right? And that's where the sort of audiobook will take you, depending on your choice. Much like, a choose your own adventure book kind of thing, but with radio theater mixed into it. But me and the other interns, we were nerds, proud nerds. So we had a Friday off. We didn't have anything to do, and we were like, why don't we put together a little role-playing game? Like, we have the tools. We could make randomized dices. We could make health pools and those kind of technical design aspects with the tools we had at our disposal. So we did that, and we just handed it over to the leadership, and they were ecstatic. I kind of semi-quote, it's been a while now, but I believe the quote was, "This is what we wanted to do for 7 years now, but we've been stuck with audiobooks, but this is what we want to do." So they gave us the green light, and this little 2-day prototype thing turned into a full title. We were given approximately a year of development time. It might have been like 10 months. But we ended up making it a proper game, and it's been released. It's been out for about a year now, and we've released 5 expansions for it as well. It's called Curse Painting, and it's available on any Alexa smart speaker, so the Amazon smart speaker series or phone app. So smart speakers haven't really made their large entry into the Scandinavian market. It's a huge deal. And a large occurrence in every or almost every American home. But I don't really know why it hasn't made a big splash in Europe, Northern Europe, just yet. I'd like to think Swedes have sort of an Orwellian resistance. That is, we don't want a device in our home that listens to us, and we don't want a camera staring at us in the living room, or something like that. It's just my sort of 2 cents. Sure, I mean, Amazon hasn't opened up their Swedish marketplace until very, very recently. But even though they have opened up a Swedish store, they don't sell the Alexas in Sweden just yet. They want to support the Swedish language, of course. We do see a few Google devices in stores in Sweden, though, so they are kind of there, but it's not all that common just yet. But they have been sold, and they have been sold a lot. So there's about 1 billion endpoints out there, and an endpoint is device capable of playing back the sort of Alexa or the Google framework. It could be a speaker. It could be a Tesla car, which comes built in with these things, by the way. Or Bose headphones, for example, which have these things enabled. So there are a lot of devices out there, and you probably have a device in your home. Chances are you do, that are capable of just interacting with this framework. So you could quite possibly just ask your headphones, like, what's the weather? Or play me a song on Spotify, that sort of thing. With 1 billion endpoints on the market, though, it means that there's roughly 97 per Swede out there. These are old numbers, by the way. They are most surely a lot higher now. But again, 97 devices per Swedish person not Swedish household. So there are quite a few devices out there on the market. And we are in the unique situation where we try to target these devices to make games for them. So this is very weird. I get that. And you might not have grasped fully what this means. So I'm hopefully going to show you something that gives you a better understanding of what this means, what it sounds like, how you interact with the thing. So I'm just going to quickly show you a trailer of the game we made, the Cursed painting game. So enjoy.
As you start to clear out the rubble, your eye catches something in the pile. Removing a few chairs reveals a sword, a bow, and a magical tome piled up on top of the hatch on the floor. Looks like someone used all means necessary to weigh down that trap door. The cell door opens, and the man stumbles over to the table where he suddenly stops.
It's too late for me. My body's not my own anymore.
With the dexterity of a fox, you skillfully jump to your feet and deal a blow of 6 damage to the undead's neck. It's clear as you enter the store, that it also serves the function of the town blacksmith.
I have been ordered to take you alive. But should you run, know that I will cut you down.
A fiery red head of hair suddenly pops out from behind the counter.
What say you, dear trickster? Will you help us?
So I'm just going to assume that you guys heard the audio. Thank you. Thank you for that thumbs up. Otherwise, this would be a wasted talk. But yes, so what you might have heard here is that the voices are, in this case, synthetic. So it's AI voices. They're not voice actors. They're robots talking. This is by design something that we are aiming for with Wanderword currently, to as large of an extent as we quite possibly can. And we'll talk more about synthetic voices in the talk. By the way, if you guys want to take notes for the Q&A sessions later, that would be great, because you will get a chance to ask any question. And I'm an open book here, because I'm a firm believer in learning from other people's mistakes and avoid making those mistakes yourself. But if you do make mistakes yourself, make sure to learn from them, because if you don't, you're in deep shit. Just quick tip. So yes, please take notes and like remember any questions for later. But yes, the game Cursed Painting also does not rely on artwork, but it's there. And that's another weird thing, because I mean, we are talking primarily smart speakers for this title. Now, one example of a smart speaker is one I have here next to me. So this here is an Alexa device. Now it clearly has a screen, but again, like, we don't require the user to have a screen. And that means that any artwork that we display on the screen once you're playing Cursed Painting needs to be supportive in nature. We can never rely on our artwork. We can never design a puzzle in a game which requires you to look at an image in order to solve said puzzle. The image can be there to support the visuals and give a better feeling for how your surrounding looks and that sort of thing. But the idea is that you should be able to play this game in your car whilst driving. So we can't force the user to look any other way at any given time, really. But that is the Cursed Painting project. So as for Wanderword, the company, we are very we are in a firm and warm and nice grasp when it comes to leadership and the founders. They are not that well known, but they should be. So the founder of the company, Peter Zetterberg, the guy closest to the camera here, he was the founder of the first Swedish game studio, UDS. They made a bunch of games for Atari systems, real old consoles for you youngster out there. a bunch of pinball games. They later went on to make a game called Ignition, which was a fairly big hit in the 90s, sort of micro machines car game kind of thing. And they also made a few Mulle-Meck games, which are incredibly loved by the Swedish people for some reason. I never got into them myself, but yeah. Peter now resides with Microsoft over in the Seattle area. And yeah, that was way back for the Atari. But yeah, Peter now works for Microsoft in the Seattle area, and he's most likely known in the modern gaming industry as, he doesn't like to say this himself, but I'm going to give him the credit of saying that he's a guy who bought Minecraft. So when Notch was thinking about selling Minecraft, Peter had the unique advantage of being in a position with a large amount of money, that is Microsoft, and he had the unique position of being a Swedish person in a high-ranking position at Microsoft. Because Peter could talk to Notch just like you can talk to another Swedish person. There's no barriers, no cultural barriers to get over, just two Swedes chatting with each other. So he started the conversation, and it ultimately landed with Microsoft buying Minecraft. A deal larger than the selling of Volvo to the Chinese. Behind him is Thomas. He's our spider in the web. He's a guy no one's ever heard of, but everyone knows him for some reason. He's a chairman from Fat Shark, amongst other things. So we have very capable leadership with a long-running line of knowledge in Wanderword when it comes to industry knowledge. So when they tell us that we are in an exciting area in game development with smart speakers, I'm going to trust them because they know far more than me. So that's like a small bit of the company. Obviously, we have about 20 odd people working with Wanderword currently. So with these smart speakers, I would dare to say that we do not compete with other game companies a lot. I mean, again, it's a very new little area of gaming. But the primary thing that a lot of game companies are forced to compete with when it comes to comparing yourself to other game companies is the user's time. Like, how you interact with games in your spare time. You come home from school, you come home from work or whatever, you sit down by the computer and you figure out what kind of game you'll play that time of day, that specific situation. But the fact is that you're in this certain specific time slot. You just arrived back home from work, you had dinner, etc., etc. What we're doing is we're actually aiming for time slots from the user perspective that is not occupied by other games, like driving to work. So you can't really play Valheim when you're driving to work, obviously. But you can listen to an interactive audiobook. You can play a quiz game, like, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire type of thing. But the questions are asked to you by the stereo system in the car, and you just say the answer out loud and you get points and that sort of thing. So our aiming for the users' sort of free time slots was the starting outlook when we started to design games for these types of platforms. But it very soon became apparent that there was a gamer out there, a type of gamer that had gone largely ignored. And we didn't have this type of gamer in mind, but they kind of started talking to us, and we did our research, and we just discovered what a huge pool of users this is: the blind gamer. So no matter if you've been born blind, or if you've been in some sort of accident at an adult age, there are so many visually impaired gamers out there. And we started researching where they sort of hang out. And it's really obscure because with the software they use to read the text back to them, because obviously they can't read, they have to resort to the old school type of forums, the PHP type forums that you rarely see nowadays. But they have quite a few hangouts where the text is easily readable to them by their sort of middleware software, and they just love the kind of thing we do. Now, I have to say, there are games out there for blind people already, but those types of games are not really applicable to players and users who are not visually impaired, because the games designed specifically for blind people are read, just like you would speed up the playback speed on YouTube by 5 times. That is the amount of speed that the visually impaired user will want to interact with, because they are, they've been using this sort of middleware for blind writing for so many years. They can just they can hear that stuff so goddamn quickly. But to a person who's not visually impaired, it just sounds like and that's like 20 sentences. But for them it's so natural. But what we did when we didn't have these visually impaired gamers in mind when we started designing was that we started designing games for everyone. It just happens so that they were included. And we approached it like, again, like a radio theater, interactive radio theater kind of thing. And when we put so much focus and development time into the audio soundscapes, the sound effects, the music, it just became a whole different thing. I believe we were one of the first studios to actually approach the audio games in such a manner. And they loved us for it. There's also a bunch of blind streamers out there. So when it comes to influencers, like, we have no larger problems with finding influencers to contact and give out our games to for free, and they can help spread the word. I mean, they're so underground. You probably never heard of them or interacted with them, but they are out there. And we are obviously super happy to sort of be there to help them along, although honestly it was never our intention. But goddamn, are we happy to just be there for them. And speaking personally, as a guy who's lost sight in one of my eyes at an early age, I'm blind on one of my eyes. I'm halfways there to being fully blown blind, if you want to put it that way. So I have a huge amount of sympathy for these guys. So moving on, when it comes to designing these kinds of games, we work with our own tool. There's a few tools out there, but our intent was to create an engine for interactive audio games to allow people from all over the world to create these experiences visually and easily without having to be a programmer or any background in programming and so forth and so on. So we started creating our own engine. So I'm just really quickly gonna show you this engine by switching my tab. And this is, if you want to, this is a part of the workshop later. You will, if you wish, you can get access to this editor and you can fiddle around with it. We're currently in a beta phase, so bear with us. But still, you will gain access to this if you want to. So what you do here is basically just right click and insert nodes. Like if you ever messed around with visual scripting, it's just like the same thing. We create a node called a say node, and this is what the device will tell the user. So when I start my game, depending on what kind of game, okay, I'm gonna make a fantasy game here because I'm a nerd. So I'm gonna say, welcome, traveler. I'm gonna misspell a whole lot. So it's just, welcome. Are you a warrior or thief? Hey. So that's all you do basically, and there are a variation of speech bubbles or states here really. So if the user starts my game and quits and then returns at a later time, there's something called repeat. No, sorry, a resume node or resume field. So if the user happens to quit and then start the game again, I'm just going to say the same thing here. And if the user has a problem saying any one of these two alternatives, I'm just going to repeat the full sentence. So I'm basically just copy pasting here. But this is just the first piece of information the game will tell me. So then we want to listen out for the user. So I'm going to listen out for the two alternatives I just listed, a warrior or a thief. So I'm just gonna click on this here node, and I'm gonna add two alternatives. So I'm gonna listen out for if the user says warrior. I'm gonna listen out for if the user says thief. And I could just include options here in case the user wants to say something optional, but in the same line as of. So I'm going to listen out for thief and rogue because they're basically the same thing. I'm going to listen out for warrior and fighter because that's basically the same thing, just in case the users happens to utter a synonym to warrior or thief. And then we just connect the two. So the game starts with saying, welcome traveler, are you a warrior or a thief? And then we just listen out for these two options. And then we start the branching. So this is branching narrative. So I just create another say node and we drag the warrior option to that. And, we just say, oh, welcome, brave warrior. That's my best impression of a narrator. And, the same thing for a rogue. So, a sneaky rogue, are we? I can't type. So just copy paste. And we just continue on from there. So that's basically how you create branching narrative and interactive stuff. And then, of course, we have tools at our disposal for display, which is an image shown on the screen. So by creating a display node after the user has picked their class, in this case, I can show an image of a warrior or a rogue to confirm the player action, and so forth and so on. And we can go totally advanced. We can roll dice. We can have conditions, switches, loops, random numbers. We can fiddle around with scripts, that sort of thing. And we can create characters. So here we have a bunch of different synthetic voice people who provides us with voices, and there's a bunch of stuff to choose from. I could create a voice for the warrior, for example. So I'm just going to create a character that is a voice called warrior, and I'm going to choose between the different providers of synthetic voices. So I'm going to go with a female German warrior, and we're just going to see what this sounds like.
The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog.
Yeah, so you can have German voices talking English, obviously, and stuff like that. And we can just, we can even we can choose a character down in this say node. So which kind of character will read this out. And the end goal is with the editor to, with a click of a button, just be able to push it out for smart speakers. Like currently it's not that easy, but we're working on it, because currently you have to have like an Alexa dev account or a Google dev account. And then, it's a further pipeline to actually publish your game on these devices. But once we're done with the editor, you as a creator should, by the push of a single button, be able to fork it out on whatever devices you want to. So we're going to allow the user to publish to the Alexa smart speakers, the Google speakers, and for mobile phones as well, with sort of an APK framework and an iOS framework. So this is very, very quickly the editor we use to create said things. But I mean, with the combination of like conditions and switches and loops and stuff like that, you can create inventory systems. You can create a combat system. You can create, libraries and stuff like that that handles the player health and equipment damage, all the technical aspects of making a proper game. You don't only have to rely on branching narrative. And then, of course, you can upload media. So by uploading media, we allow you to upload audio. So you can design your sound effects, your music, what have you, and just chunk it in here as audio. And you can play it back in the say notes, and then you can create. You don't have to rely on the synthetic voices, by the way. You can just record your own voice as a voice actor and chunk it in there as a sound effect. So you don't have to rely on any robot speech at all. So yes, that was very quickly the sort of tool we work with. And if you guys want to test it later, it's going to be available to you during the workshop stage, and you'll get to keep beta access for the foreseeable future. You can fiddle around with it in your spare time if you want to. So that was the editor. And I'm going to go back to the slides real quick and sort of move on to the next topic. Again, please take notes and ask me any questions during the Q&A session. So, resolutions. 1 second. There we go. So, yes, the importance of audio. Here we are. There's a lot of things to say here, obviously. But all in all, this is me generalizing, but I see the tendency in studios, large as big, to neglect the audio portion of their sort of production pipeline. Unfortunately, I see a lot of studios waiting until the very last second to start thinking about the audio, and that is quite possibly not the best choice. I would argue that you should start audio design at the same stage as you start visually concepting, actually, because a clear line for the audio is just as important as having a sort of a clear and distinct line when it comes to the visuals. Like, just imagine, I'm sure most of you have played Overwatch. Now, Overwatch in its visual design is very rounded, it's very colorful, it's very warm in its visual aesthetics, and that is also reflected in the audio. You'll have a hard time finding any sound effect in Overwatch which is described or could be described as sharp. Most of the sound effects are very well rounded, and I would almost say soft to the touch, even though that is super, super weird description, I know. But when it comes to audio, get used to weird descriptions, because audio people will always make reference to audio very visually, or even though there's no visuals involved in audio, or very little visuals involved in audio design. But you also have to realize that you are going to be working with a sort of superpower, a human superpower, when you're working with audio and designing audio. And here's a quick example. And this is that time for the poll, Patrick. So I'm going to play you a sound effect. Now, this sound effect is 2 sounds, really, played one after each other. It's the sound of a glass being filled with water. So you're going to see a poll in the Google Meet. Yep, there we go. So I want you to listen out for this sound effect, and I want you guys to answer in the poll whether or not you thought the first or the second one is hot. So one is going to be cold, and one is going to be hot. A glass being filled with either hot or cold water. So please vote in the poll when you think you discovered the warm option. So here we go. So I'm going to play you this again. And to reiterate, we are looking for the hot option. So do you think the first one is hot, or do you think the second one is hot? I'm going to play you it again, and you can cast your vote. Okay. So I'm going to... Okay, do you think you can show us the numbers, Patrick? I hope it's public. But I mean, in either case, you guys know yourself what you voted for. I hope it's not waiting for everyone to vote or something like that. Did it email us the answer?
Okay, so it's 16 votes for the option number 2, and
As
0
opposed-
for option 1.
Right. Okay. Very good. Thank you. That is excellent. You are qualified, each and every one of you, to be an excellent specimen of a cave person, because this is a human superpower that's like been evolving with us being humans, really, throughout the ages. If you were to look at this sound effect side by side, you can mute yourself, by the way, Patrick. I'm just hearing you clicking. Thank you. So yeah, if you were to analyze these two sound effects side by side through proper measuring instruments, you would find hardly a difference. Like, you would have to be a dog or a cat to really hear the difference. But with humans, we have taught ourselves through making mistakes for 100,000 of years to warn our bodies and put us on high alert when we think we're hearing something dangerous. And in this case, it's hot, scalding water. So yes, this is a sort of human superpower. Just like you can distinctly hear if a person is talking to you on the telephone and smiling, like in American call centers, for example, they have mirrors in front of their monitors. And when they call people up, they have to smile when they call people up, because it's so very distinct. I think they increase their numbers by 30% or something if they smile when they're trying to talk people into buying whatever shoddy product they're selling. And this is, again, is another, thing we've evolved with. We're always looking for friendly people to sit down with by the campfire and just, join the tribe, so to speak. So it's just, there's so many small nuances of human hearing that we have to cater to when we're looking at designing audio. But as for audio in media, talking like movies and games and stuff like that, we've also been lied to. We've been lied to for so very long that we expect reality to sound in a certain manner, and that is not always true. So, for example, gunshots and explosions, like it or not, it's a large part of media. Like, no matter if you're watching a movie or playing a game, there's usually weapons involved, right? So for watching movies with explosions, you have these large fiery type of explosions. But if you've done your military service and thrown hand grenades around, you would realize that explosions, they don't look like that. They're fairly weak, actually. They don't look like much. They absolutely don't sound like they do in movies. And same goes with weapons. So here, for example, we have two examples of I believe it is a shotgun being fired. So in the first example here, we're going to hear a real shotgun. It's incredibly meh. It's weak. It's boring. It doesn't have an oomph to it, right? It's a normal gun. They do sound like this usually, but we're used to hearing them like this. It's a lot meatier. It's wider. It's fatter, really. And you would never, ever hear a gun sound like this in real life, unless quite possibly you're in a totally isolated, room with padding and whatever equalizer tweaking you have going into the microphone and whatnot. It's just, yeah. Basically, media has turned and tweaked a lot of sound up to 11 when it comes to exaggeration. And this is normal for us in this industry. So we have to get used to tweaking things up to 11, really exaggerate a lot of our audio designs. And I mean, the picture is very macabre. I'm sure most of you have seen the old Avatar movie. It was quite a big deal when it hit the cinema. And a lot of people who hadn't played games before, and this is me guesstimating, but I assume that people who had played games before they watched the Avatar did not succumb to the same effect that people without gaming experience who watched the Avatar movie. Because after the Avatar movie had been shown in cinemas, there was an incredible rise in suicide. Super macabre, I know. But the fact is that a lot of people who weren't accustomed to these bright colors, these fantastical worlds that were being showed on the screen, they went home and they looked around. They looked out the window. It was gray, dull. There was no vivid colors around them. People got depressed. A lot of people got really depressed after watching the Avatar movie. And this is sort of the same exaggeration that we see in a lot of visual and audio design when it comes to games. But again, I'd like to think that people who had gaming experience prior to watching Avatar had already sort of this immune system built in. They were used to watching vivid colors, seeing fantastical worlds and stuff like that. Again, this is me guesstimating, but a stupid little comparison. As for just generally designing for games, and the importance of audio is never as important as when you limit your visuals in your game designs. A typical example, a horror game. It's a dark forest. You have a limited field of view, first person perspective, and it's dark. You have a flashlight, you have a lantern. You're very, very limited in your visuals. So what happens with the human, going back to the superpower sort of aspect of human hearing, we are going to start compensating for our lack of visuals. So our concentration, our input when it comes to information into the human brain is going to switch ever so slightly from visual more to the audio side of things, because we are not seeing as much. So we're going to fine tune our hearing. So if you happen to, in the future, design a game like the one in the picture, a first-person perspective horror thing, and you happen to, let's say, mess up the audio, maybe you don't think about the audio design at an early enough stage or something like that, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to have a real hard time convincing the user or scaring the user if you don't properly pan your audio and create emitters in their proper place. So with a game like this, you could quite possibly have a waterfall or something like that in one direction, which properly gives the user guidance. So if you turn one way, you hear the waterfall to your right. You turn the other way, you hear the waterfall to the left. You don't need to see the waterfall, but it's there as an audio cue, which helps the user to navigate, because the visuals is not really helping the users to navigate in this scenario, because it's dark. You only have a flashlight. It's a forest. One tree is going to look a lot like the other tree. So using audio here could help your experience immensely if you implement it early and think about it. So audio cues have been important for an incredible long time, really. I mean, just look back at the Mario platformer games of the 8-bit and 16-bit era. You had this, I can't remember the name of the enemy, but it was a square block that just fell down, rose, fell down, rose. It was a spiky sort of block. I can't remember the name of it. But you would hear that enemy before you actually saw it on the screen, to warn the player, like, stop running. You probably shouldn't be running at full speed here, Mario. There's a thing to your right. And there was a slight amount of screen shake as well to help sort of warn the player that, tone it down, Mario. The Mario games also made, I wouldn't say they were the first ones, but they made an incredible psychological discovery. When you pick up the coins in Mario, unless they've changed things, I haven't played Mario for quite some time, but once you've collected like 100 coins, you get an extra life. And for each coin you collect, the pitch of the sound effect, that little bling when you pick up the coin, it increases ever so slightly in pitch as you get closer and closer to 100 coins, and you get that extra life. This is something we see in casinos as well. One-armed bandits, when the wheels start spinning and the first one stops, the second one stops, the third one stops. Jackpot if you're lucky. But for each sort of pling when those wheels stops, the pitch increases. So this is a psychological reward methodology. It just triggers our brain. I don't think anyone's done any research in this field. It's a known fact, but no one knows why. But if you have a repeating sound effect that's slowly increasing in pitch, the reward central of our brain is just going to fire off endorphins left, right, and center. We're just going to get triggered. Like, something good is coming. Something good is coming. Because the pitch is increasing. So it is that way, but no one knows why. And we've been using it in games since, the 80s, really. Just a few tidbits when it comes to just generalistic, holistic audio design. There we go. Okay, so I'm realizing, in the interest of time, I'm gonna speed things up a little bit. So when it comes to designing audio, there's quite a lot of stuff you might want to design audio for, but it's not making any sound. So this is especially important for us working with only audio, but it's quite important to with normal games as well. You might want to guide the player to that body. The body might have a key on it or something like that, which you need as a player to progress in the game. So what kind of sound does a dead body make? Well, by its very nature, nothing, really. So what we have to approach as audio designers is the result, the consequences of this action, this dead body. So here's an example of what a dead body could sound like. So we have this emitter in the game. It might be a first-person perspective game. You're trying to guide the user as a designer or as a producer towards a corpse which holds a key. So you have this emitter from the corpse. It's a fly. It'll help guide the player by, he or she is turning the camera around, properly identifying where the sound is coming from, and walking over to the corpse and finds the key. So sometimes you might have to think about the consequences of an action and highlight the sound that consequence would make instead of the actual action itself. So I was talking earlier about how they've turned realism up to 11 with just exaggeration in sounds. There are also cases, obviously, where you want to stick to reality. You could be making, an Arma type military simulator, or in the case that I was involved with some years ago, we had to make a detective story which took place in the Seattle waterfront. Now, this is a real place. So if any users were to listen to this interactive audiobook and they are from this area, it better sound real. So what we did in this case, we had to do our fair share of research. We looked at people who had, as tourists, visited this waterfront and took photos and videos of it and uploaded them to YouTube. And we could see the type of material that was used to build the waterfront. It's wooden. So we would implement wooden footsteps on wooden surfaces. We could see that there was boats that came and went from this pier. So we would have just the sound of air horns, foghorns, that's the one, and just waves crashing on the shores, seagulls, and there was even like a Ferris wheel with people screaming in it when we looked at the tourist footage. So when we made the detective story, this was sort of the ambiance that we ended up with from having looked at the tourist videos. So there's this PA speaker announcing the departure of boats and just footsteps on wooden floors. Again, seagulls, water crashing, stuff like that. So this was my very first task, by the way, at Wanderword. So my very first task in creating this ambience was very, very research heavy. Unlike fantasy stuff, where you're free to just make up whatever fantastical sounds you want. I mean, there's no real recording of a fireball going off, so you kind of had to design that stuff yourself. So when designing audio, especially if you have no visual references, like in the case of Wanderword, we just have a script, we have a written page, and we have to figure out what things are looking like. You can always sort of think about the 3 stages of animation, and I'm sure most of you guys have like touched on this. So typically when you boil animations down into 3 steps, you have the wind-up phase, you have the strike phase, and the recovery phase. People might call it something else from time to time, but generally you have the preparation, you have the action, and then you have the recovery. So this is something that we see and hear in audio all the time. Like if you ever get a text message, there's a clear couple of milliseconds in that sound effect whenever your phone makes a little ping. So there's a few milliseconds of the sound building up, and then there's the action, and then there's sort of the efterklang, the recovery, or the tail of the sound. So if you were ever to remove the wind-up sound of any of these UI elements, be it from phones or any type of device, it would sound horrible. Trust me, like everyone would hate getting a text message because they would just get caught off guard. So just preparing the user for a few milliseconds, then you have the body of the sound effect, and then the recovery. So here's a quick example of how we approached this in Curse Painting, designing the introductory part for one of the characters. So in this case, we have a woman being pushed through a mob of people. She's getting thrown off a cliff. and her hands are sort of tied behind her back in chains, and she's getting pushed towards a cliff by a mob of angry people. So here we have a guy pushing this woman in front of him, and once he actually sort of pushes on her shoulder or back, there's this rustle of clothes. She takes a few steps forwards. You have the rustling of chains, and she's like, oh, grunts. So a quick example of the 3 steps of animation being applied to soundscape from Cursed Painting here. Yep, real quick. So again, quickly name dropping some audio resources here for you students. I understand you guys have sort of musical education nearby. So I hope you guys are sort of collaborating in between the game making education and musical education. If not, you should be. So for actually making, and I'm going to say normal games, there's a bunch of middleware around, and you are most likely aware of these, or at least heard of them. So for Unity and Unreal, there's Fmod or VWise or Wise. I tend to recommend Fmod to students because unless they changed something recently, they have a very indie-friendly sort of subscription model. It's not even a subscription model. I believe it's free to use for any studio until you have like 5 million in revenue, at which point you have to pay some sum of 50,000 or somewhere thereabouts. But like if you're just starting up or want to fiddle around with it, it's completely free. So I recommend Fmod. Now, what this does, very shortly, is allow you to basically create whatever type of audio engine you will. So if you want to make dynamic soundtracks, for example, you could create a looping part of a song, which will just keep on looping. But before that, you have the introductory part, and then you have sort of the ending of the song. And you can layer a bunch of variations of the song on top of each other and switch in between them depending on what happens in the game. So like Breath of the Wild, super typical example. You're walking in a meadow, there's calm and nice music in the background. But if you're getting attacked by an enemy, the game engine will just send a signal to Fmod telling them to switch states, and you would be able to just switch from a calm state to sort of combat music, and then back again. This is also great for randomizing sound effects. So if you want to take footsteps, for example, where you have to have a bunch of different sounds for footsteps, otherwise it would get very repetitive, trust me. You could just pool them together in Fmod and have the Fmod engine or the middleware just randomize in between these footsteps. You can even randomize a pitch to a sound effect. In case you have a very narrow or limited amount of sound effects, you can take a single sound effect and make slight pitch variations to it every time it's played. So it's a great little tool and worth looking into. There's 1,001 tutorials on YouTube for this, obviously. Strongly suggest it. Now, on that note, there's also pretty much the same thing, but uniquely for music, a Swedish middleware called Elias. Now, Elias, I've had the pleasure of working with them for a while, and it's really awesome in the way that you're able to create music and different layers and variations to music, that is stems for you music nerds out there, and you can hook them into intensity levels. So what we're seeing here in the right-hand screenshot is just intensity levels going from the very top, which is 1, to the very bottom, which is 25, I think. And the different columns are instruments. So you have the cello in one column, you have the drums in one column, and they're not aligned evenly. So once you go down to intensity level 5 out of 25, we add the drums on top of it. And if we switch to combat music, we can have all manners of nice little things happening in the music, depending on how you create the music, obviously. But again, a great tip for you musically inclined people out there who wants to create dynamic game music, look up Elias software. But for you people who wants to design sounds, there's free assets out there. I mean, there's always freesound.org, but in this case, you pay what you get for, and it's free. So there's also the GDC audio bundles. I strongly suggest you Google that and you make space on your hard drives for it, because it's like 300 gigs or something like that. Every time there's a GDC conference, the guys who have sound studios, who create sound packs, they get together and they put small samples into a package and release it for free. And they have been doing so since like 2015. So if you Google GDC audio bundle, you will be able to find like so much stuff. And it's not only free, it's, royalty free. So you can actually release a game today using stuff from these packs, and you don't have to pay them anything because it's freebies. And in this case, it's really great. There's also a bunch of different audio repositories out there for a small subscription fee. That is, 100 crowns a month, stuff like that. There's audio blocks. There's sound snippets. Oh, God, I can't remember the name of them. But audio blocks is one very cheap alternative where you can just get an online repository and use stuff from there. As for designing sounds, like there's two methodologies. You can record your stuff or you can design your stuff. So the difference here for any audio designers is obviously you grab a watermelon and you throw it into a brick wall and you record the sound of that. You use it for a head exploding or whatever you want to use it for in your game. Or you can design your sounds. So you find the sound of a watermelon being thrown into a brick wall through an online repository, and you use that. So, I mean, one of the two options takes more time, but you can't always find what you're looking for in these repositories. So there's often a combination of both going on in professional game studio. Yes, moving on. So for you guys who are actively interacting with each other, you might be doing it on a student basis or on a professional basis. I would argue that it's incredibly important for team coherency and just teamwork to learn the lingo. So you might be a programmer, you might not have the slightest interest of sound design or anything like that at all. But if you know what the sound designer is talking about when he comes up to you and asking you for a feature, like, you are gonna cooperate a whole lot better if you learn the lingo. And I'm not gonna teach you the lingo here and now. I'm just gonna roughly touch on it. They say all feedback is good feedback. And I largely agree with that when it comes to getting feedback from external sources. But if you have internal feedback, then I would argue that not all feedback is good feedback. If you're unable to give feedback without saying why, you have bad feedback. You have a destructive feedback. If I walk up to another person in my studio and say that stuff you did, I don't like it, it's bad. If that's the extent of my feedback, it's destructive feedback. I need to be able to say why, both when it comes to good feedback and negative feedback, or constructive feedback, if you will. So with that being said, unless you can touch on why something is bad, you are getting caught in this scenario. And this is why it's important to learn the lingo. So if you walk up to an audio designer and say, just I don't like the sound, it's bad. Please learn some lingo. So if you think it sounds tinny or there's a lack of reverb, or the reverb doesn't sound like it's fitting in the actual surrounding, or stuff like that. Like, that's great. As I touched on earlier, a lot of audio stuff is very visual in its descriptors. So again, it could sound crushed, could sound muddy, could sound boomy, smeared, or brittle. That's just a few of the words people throw around when they talk about audio. So boomy, it might be too loud, might be too wide. Crushed is probably a horrible bitrate, or it's drowning underneath other stuff. And muddy, I can't make up what the guy is saying. There's so many other things playing at the same time. It all sounds muddy. We should try separating the sound, placing some of them to the left and some of them to the right, shifting the equalizer around, stuff like that. So learning the lingo is always good. Like, I'm no programmer. I can barely write a little hello world thing. I'm just not built that way. I have a super hard time picking up programming, but I at least trying to learn the lingo. I know what an if statement is and stuff like that. So I can at least, from a rough perspective, analyze an action and try to pinpoint the fault or the issue when I go up to a programmer and talk about something. And this slide again. I can't remember why that picture is there, so I'm just going to skip it. Sorry. So moving on real quickly to synthetic voices. I told you guys earlier that we largely focus on synthetic voice here at Wanderword. This serves us a great many purposes, and it started to serve a lot of professional studio some purpose as well, even though they're not actively using synthetic voices in their end productions. But for us, it enables us to obviously create something on the cheap side, but it scales very, very well, very, very well. So if we need to take a game and translate it into German or Spanish or what have you, and I'm generalizing, but it's basically just taking a bunch of text, chucking it into Google Translate, fetching it back, and changing the voice, the synthetic voice, to a German one or a Spanish one, and boom, it's translated. Now, it has its downsides, obviously. There's oftentimes a lack of emotional control, but we are seeing a lot of people working with synthetic voices are really starting to catch on, and I'm going to show you a few examples. So here we have two examples, like ye old Stephen Hawking, as opposed to what you can get out of a synthetic voice provider today.
Hello there, I am pleased to meet you. Hello there, I'm pleased to meet you.
So obviously there's a great deal of improvement over the last 15 years. Just during the last year, we've seen so many of these providers starting to touch on emotional control, and that is immensely helpful for us, because you can't really have, obviously, a person in dire need. Let's say a character in your game has been shot and is bleeding to death, and if we have no emotional control and we try to portray that character saying, please help me, it's like, please help me, I am dying, I'm bleeding to death. Like, come on, that doesn't work. But we are seeing improvements, and here's a super quick example of a narrator narrating the image you see here. It's fantasy type deal. You're stuck in a sewer and you're fiddling around with a pile of skulls, for example. So here we have a narrator telling you that you're interacting with a pile of skulls, and then we have a companion to the player saying, "Oh, stop it! That's not kosher." So this is what it sounds like with the emotional adjustments to the disgust in the companion's voice. So when you touch the skulls, your companion will sound kind of disgusted.
Half a dozen skulls sit neatly stacked in a small pyramid.
What kind of sick individual would do such a thing?
The skulls are way too small and round to fit any creature you've ever seen.
Yeah. So again, we can get away with a lot by simply taking a synthetic voice and placing it inside of a reverb chamber of some kind. So here we have a sewer. So we take this companion, which has very good sounding quality to their synthetic voice, and just applying reverb and echo and just clothes rustling whenever they take a step. And we can see there's a lot of water down here. So basically when they take a step, there's a little splash. So by combining all these small elements, we can get a fairly convincing narrative out of it. And to our great advantage, when we make these kinds of games, we can afford some emotional disconnect to the narrator. Because when you think about it from a design perspective, the narrator of the story, the dungeon master, if you will, is seldomly the one in dire needs. So the narrator is, well, on the other side of the fourth wall, really, and the characters acting it out on stage are the ones that needs the convincing emotional control. So for any narrator, again, we can get away with just using pretty much whatever voice, as long as they sound good. So that is basically the end of my slide run.
Thank you so much. Was there anything else you needed to share, Henrik?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just really distracted because I'm seeing links flying left and right. There we go. There's a quick YouTube link that has, again, like a 2-minute tutorial thing of how to create a short story in the editor. So feel free to look at that at any given time. And before I leave you guys, I also want to touch on the fact that we are always open to internships here at Wanderword. So if you ever feel like doing the whole trek up to Boden when you guys are looking for internships by the end of your education, we are always looking to take on interns, and we have student housing accommodation. Like, we can guarantee you housing, as opposed to a lot of the larger regions. Like, might be stereotyping, but I can't imagine that Stockholm is having a very easy time guaranteeing student housing. Just saying. So if you want to take that leap of faith, we are always looking for interns. So just look us up, Google Wanderword, and contact us once you're looking for that sort of position. I would love to be able to tell you guys what we're working with. We are working with some fairly large projects currently, third-party licenses and IPs that I would get fired if I told you about it. But I will tell you that they are world renowned for, look, how many people are we? 19 people. I can guarantee you 16 of you 19 people in this call have played these games previously. We're working with 3 very large IPs. And the very second I can tell you about this, I will be grabbing a megaphone, I'll be standing on the roof, and I'll be shouting it out loud, because these are games that I've been playing most of my life. So I'm very excited. And if you want to have a shot at working with world-leading like licenses, Wanderword is going to be the place to be.
Well, thank you, Henrik. Super. That sounds very exciting. And thank you so much for a very interesting talk. I think you've inspired us all to think about sound design in a new way, audio games and experiences. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Yep. See you guys. And if there's any questions, shoot me an email. You have it in the chat. Good luck, and hopefully you learned something. See you guys around.
Lovely. Thank you, Henrik.
Thank you.